Hi, I'm Ollie. Welcome to Possibility Space. Today we're going to talk about two organizations who are promoting ethnic supremacy in Asia by rebranding it as a defense of minority rights in the West. I'm reading you. The Hindu American Foundation are repeating the mistakes of the Anti-Defamation League. The Anti-Defamation League, or ADL, was founded in 1913. Its mission is to, quote, stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all. It has an admirable history of campaigning for Jewish safety. It has also fought for civil rights, including abortion rights, marriage equality, and reparations for Japanese Americans interned by the United States during World War II. The organization rightly takes pride in its wide remit and its impact. Its mission and history page states that it was, quote, founded with the clear understanding that the fight against one form of prejudice cannot succeed without battling prejudice in all forms. That clarity dimmed in 1948 when the State of Israel was founded. The ADL now had two objectives: ending prejudice and supporting Israel. Time and time again, when these objectives came into conflict, Israel won. For example, when Elon Musk accused Jews of, quote, hatred against whites, the ADL defended him. It did so because Musk was limiting pro-Palestinian speech on Twitter. The ADL defended Musk again when he zig-heiled at Donald Trump's inauguration. They said he, quote, made an awkward gesture in a moment of enthusiasm. How did the ADL reach this conclusion? Approached for comment by the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, it simply refused to elaborate. Compromising its principles has damaged the ADL's reputation. Jewish journalists now criticize their anti-Semitism statistics, which conflate valid criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. Earlier this year, Wikipedia's editors declared the ADL a generally unreliable source. One editor on the decision panel remarked that, quote, the ADL no longer appears to adhere to a serious, mainstream, and intellectually cogent definition of anti-Semitism, but has instead given into the shameless politicization of the very subject that it was originally esteemed for being reliable on. You might think that this would give the ADL pause for thought, but it didn't. They instead tried to get Wikipedia's board to overrule their editors. That request was rightly rebuffed. The Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, then escalated the situation. It threatened to dox Wikipedia's editors. Approached for comment, the ADL declined to condemn this threat. Things got so bad that ADL staff wrote to their boss, quote, we are losing trust with other extremism researchers, media outlets, anti-hate organizations, civil rights groups, and, perhaps most concerningly, large swaths of the Jewish community that we are committed to serving. Some of these staff were summoned to meetings with the ADL's HR department. They were reportedly asked to quit. Many of them did. All of this is bad news for the defamed people who the ADL aims to defend. We can learn lessons here. Now I'll introduce the second group that this article focuses on, the Hindu American Foundation, or the HAF. The HAF is an ADL lookalike group. It's partnered with the ADL and it aims to replicate their political success. Unfortunately, it's also mirroring the mistakes made by its mentor. This article examines these organizations and their shared mistakes, and it proposes a return to the ADL's seemingly forgotten founding principle, that the fight against one form of prejudice cannot succeed without battling prejudice in all of its forms. Exceptionalism. Both organizations assert themselves as the singular voice representing their communities. They want to be the only voice for an entire people, and they shun and denigrate anybody who disagrees. The ADL compares Jews who disagree with it to white nationalists. Then it contradicts itself by calling them Iranian proxies. The HAF, similarly, strongly dislikes Hindu groups that oppose its very conservative politics. Hubris has led these civil rights organizations to oppose civil rights. They need to get over themselves. They need to accept that communities are not monoliths and to allow diversity and disagreement within them. They must recognize that interfaith solidarity is the only way to achieve true equality. Friendly fire. The ADL and the HAF aren't the only organizations constructing hierarchies of racism and then placing themselves at the top. Many organizations subscribe to this zero-sum logic. They believe that there's only so much equality to go around, so they better get theirs. This pattern leads to interest groups harming each other. I think that this story will help illustrate what I mean. Please bear with me, there are quite a lot of acronyms in this one. Desi's Rising Up and Moving, shortened to DRUM, is a South Asian and Indo-Caribbean campaign group. The Asian American Foundation, shortened to TAF, is a billionaire-backed nonprofit. TAF supports both DRUM and the ADL. The ADL successfully called for Desi protesters to be jailed for protesting against Israel's genocide in Gaza. TAF, who you'll recall are partnered with the ADL, then funded DRUM to help bail out those individuals. In the words of Fad Ahmed, DRUM's executive director, quote, "In the last 9 months, we've had to do actual work on the ground that is being created by the ADL's targeting of students and teachers in high schools for pro-Palestine activism. TAF is supporting us to do work that we're having to do because of the ADL. The ADL shot back, we make no apologies for doing everything in our power to stop anti-Semitism." Friendly fire incidents like this will keep happening so long as civil rights groups position racism against their affinity group as a unique problem instead of what it is, one form of bigotry among many interconnected hatreds. Ethno-nationalism. Another similarity between the HAF and the ADL is a legitimacy crisis. They both face questions about who and what they represent. Both crises stem from a clash of agendas. The group's ethno-nationalist goals fundamentally conflict with their founding principles of equality and justice. Most of my listeners know that Israel is an ethno-nationalist apartheid state. Hindutva, however, also known as Hindu nationalism, is less well known, so here's a quick primer on that. Hindutva is a nationalist response to colonial rule in and the partition of India. I oppose all ethno-nationalisms, but it's important to note that Hindutva can manifest benignly as a kind of faith-based national pride, and that it did help dismantle the governing structures of the British Raj. However, Prime Minister Narendra Modi mainstreamed Hindutva as a majoritarian far-right project. It marks Hindus as insiders and other groups, notably Muslims, as outsiders. It advocates for Hindu supremacy and seeks to turn India, presently a secular state, into an ethno-religious nation. The HAF support Modi's Hindutva in many ways, promoting his political party, the BJP, excusing the BJP's human rights violations, attacking mainstream human rights organizations that criticize the BJP, demonizing Muslims and even Hindus who oppose Hindutva, and advocating that the US government monitor Sikhs. All of this uncannily echoes the ADL's approach to silencing critics of Israel. They promote Israel, they excuse the country's human rights violations, they too attack mainstream human rights organizations that criticize Israel, they demonize critics of Israel, including Muslim supporters of Palestinian rights, Jews who oppose Israel's war on Palestine, and shamefully, even opponents of South African apartheid. They advocate and allegedly took part in the spying on and infiltration of these groups. Laying out the ADL and the HAF's tactics like this, it's not difficult to spot the similarities. Both organizations are promoting majoritarian fascism in one country by rebranding it as a defense of minority rights in another. This looks a lot like a shared playbook and does beg the question, are these organizations beyond saving? Are these the honest mistakes of flawed but salvageable groups? Or is this the playbook of a new, emerging, multiracial far right? Despite all that I've written above, I still hold a perhaps naive hope that we can salvage these groups. The ADL was once a leading anti-hate group. It's been really upsetting to watch its, frankly, total moral collapse. The organizations aren't really the point, though. They're vehicles for our desires, so it's really our desires that need to change. We must totally abandon the myth that any one of us can be safe if we're not all safe. We need to form coalitions, not interest groups. We will achieve safety through solidarity. If these organizations cannot get on board with that, then we'll replace them. I'm going to end this one with a call to action. If you oppose organizations advancing ethno-nationalist agendas while claiming to be civil rights organizations, then I recommend that you read and sign first the Severa Coalition's Declaration Against Hindu Supremacy, and then the Drop the ADL campaign's open letter to progressives. There are links to both of those on the Substack. Speaking of links, here's some further reading that I discovered and I think might be of interest to you while I was researching this episode. First up, the Other ADLs episode of the Jewish Currents podcast is a comprehensive and helpful primer on this topic, and in general, the Jewish Currents podcast is just excellent. Halfway to Supremacy, How the Hindu American Foundation Rebrands Bigotry as Minority Rights, is, as well as a fun bit of wordplay, a pretty exhaustive report on this topic. Hindutva as a variant of right-wing extremism is a really useful history. It contextualizes Hindutva in the broader scope of right-wing extremism as a global occurrence, and it debunks some common Western misinterpretations of Hindutva. And lastly, on the Substack, I've included some links to a topic that is out of scope for this podcast, but does kind of link in, which is another similarity between the supremacist projects discussed here is that both of them are ultimately vestiges of British colonial meddling. That topic is far too large to address here, but I wanted to point out that it connects to my argument that our answer to supremacy must never again be counter-supremacy. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that and found that insightful. Possibility Space is a reader-supported publication. You can subscribe for free or become a paid subscriber over on the Substack. And if you're listening on a podcast app, I'd really appreciate if you gave us a positive rating. Thank you. See you next time.